There we go. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining the webinar today. So as hopefully you all know, we're going to be talking a little bit about ASIC's regulatory guidance, RG-271. If you haven't heard of it, just wait a few moments and we'll give you a bit more info, but I'm hoping everyone at least has a little bit of context on ASIC and RG-271 and how it relates to complaints and dispute resolution in financial services particularly. One of the other things we're going to be exploring today is obviously how machine learning can help financial services organisations increase their compliance with RG-271 and reduce the risk of not adhering to those guidelines. And also, I suppose, do so at a reasonable cost as well. Before I do launch into the agenda, though, I wanted to just give you a bit of information for those of you that don't know who we are. So both of the brands here today that are conducting this webinar are part of a house of brands called Mantel Group. Mantel Group was formed in 2017, and in just 4 years, we've grown to over 450 people. All of the brands within Mantel Group focus on different tech specialties, and within those specialties, we've got quite a few different capabilities, and that ranges all the way from advisory and design services at the front end through to software engineering, of course, cloud platforms, and very importantly for today, there's a very strong focus in the business on data and artificial intelligence. So the two brands you'll be hearing from today is Kasna, and I'm Simon Polton from Kasna, by the way, for those that I haven't met. We're a premier partner of Google Cloud. We work with Australian organisations of all different sizes to help them realise better customer experience from Google Cloud's products and services. The other important brand for today will be Eliiza. Eliiza are a specialist data science, machine learning and artificial intelligence brand, and then they've helped some of Australia's best known brands drive value from those technologies. Now, both the brands have worked together in a lot of circumstances, and certainly we're no stranger to the financial services sector. We've in fact worked on Google's technology in 3 of the big 4 banks together, but we've also worked in a bunch of smaller organisations as well, and that's across banking, insurance, and many other sub-verticals within financial services. So hopefully for those that hadn't met us, a little bit of context on who we are. Just running through the agenda at a high level, we're lucky enough today to be joined by Paul Muir from Compliance Advocacy Solutions. Paul's our resident industry expert, and he's going to be running us through a little bit about the RG-271 regulation and some of the items from a dispute resolution perspective. Then we're lucky enough to have Marina from Eliiza talking a bit about some of the concepts that machine learning bring to complaint identification and how to leverage those for value. Finally, we'll be doing a bit of a solution walkthrough in the work that we've done in the industry. We've managed to pull together some accelerators that can really help organisations of all sizes derive value from these technologies very, very quickly. And with that, I will hand over to Paul to cover RG-271. Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much for that, Simon. Thank you for the kind invitation, and hello, everyone. If there's any questions that you would like to ask me as we go through, feel free to use the chat button or put your hand up, etc., etc. So I thought the way that I would start, I think everyone probably by now, given that RG-271 came into effect on the 5th of October, kind of understands the basics of RG-271. So what I would do first, given the whole wave of new laws and industry code in the insurance world that have come through in October, I thought I would share some tips and insights as to how you can get your head around everything. So I've kind of come up with 9 handy hints as we go to the next slide. Thanks, Simon. And why 9? Because 9 just fitted into the actual circle. So it is as simple as that. Don't get overcomplicated about this. if you had asked me for 10, I probably could have given you 10. But I've tried to kind of come up with, when I work with my clients, and I only work within the financial services, and I specialize within the insurance industry. These are the common areas that I spend a lot of time with my clients on. So the first one is a typical large insurer in financial services may have more than 5,000 obligations that they have to manage, right down to a authorized representative. They may have about 100 or so. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever to actually focus upon the obligations. Yes, you have to identify them, you have to capture them, etc. What makes much more sense is that you assign your key controls to the obligation, and then you start to get some common obligations involved, and then your focus may go from, say, 1,000 obligations down to, say, 10 or 15 key controls across your organization. It's a much easier way to actually manage the wave of financial services laws. For where you've got a team of people, they become the eyes and ears of your organization. So again, the actual people at the coalface who are dealing with the complaints and dealing with customers, they actually don't care too much about subsection 5A, paragraph 3 of the Corporations Act. What they want to know is, tell me what a complaint actually looks like, because unfortunately people don't carry a big sign saying I'm making a complaint. So I would say spend all your energy and do it via examples, real life practical examples of what a complaint is, and don't make them have to work out, because as far as RG-271 is concerned, there's kind of 4 elements that compromise what a complaint is. They don't need to know that. Because you don't want them to be the gatekeeper. You allow other more specialized people to be the gatekeeper. So you kind of want to err on the cautious conservative side and allow stuff to come in. So the emphasis is you must get your people to know and be able to identify a complaint, and once they've done so, then what do they actually do with that? That then goes to point 3, where you do need to have expert people or specialized people, because one of the things that ASIC talks about is that you need to have the ability to identify a complex complaint right from the early stages, and that would normally involve a complaint that may involve a person who is subject to a family violence situation, or may have quite a serious illness. So again, you simply can't allow those just to go through your normal pipeline. You need to have someone experienced right from the outset to say, okay, here is quite a complex complaint, and then that gets handed off to the person with the appropriate level of expertise. It's very clear, we know, that the banking sector, the life sector, and the general insurance sector have all now got industry codes, and they're quite they are very much customer focused, and we're seeing ASIC are now, especially if you're in insurance, for example, around claims handling, you'll see that in the actual guidance or information sheet 253 that ASIC put out, ASIC are now really talking about the industry codes a lot. So the way to think about industry codes is they complement your obligations at law. So all of your obligations at law are under enforceable paragraphs under RG-271. How you do certain stuff can be then complemented by the industry codes. So industry codes are quite important. Data, 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 data. The more data you'll have, the better informed you will be. And don't get, because one of the things that ASIC requires you to do, even though a single complaint may of itself not appear to be overly important or complex, but the aggregation of complaints may indicate that there's something happening, something going wrong, and if you don't jump upon it, it's going to cause customer harm over a period of time. So the only way you'll be able to ascertain that is by collecting data. Don't forget, complaints is the voice of your customer, and incidents is the voice of your employees. So I kind of understand it, but I kind of smile a bit. Yeah, I've heard everyone who says, yes, we do pay attention to our customers. We do pay attention to our employees. And then I ask them, well, show me the actual data that you've captured. And they haven't got much. Or they've got these wonderful, beautiful incident management registers in place and they're empty. So kind of what's the point of that? So data is key. And if you genuinely want to pay attention to what your customer and what your employees are telling you, then you'll capture all that data. Again, monitoring and supervision is key of your employees, of your authorized representatives, etc., etc. The new reportable situations to ASIC are now onerous, and don't forget that hidden under the guise of a complaint may be an obligation under your financial services laws that you must tell ASIC about. So again, you need to be able to capture complaints and interrogate the complaint to also see have we actually complied with our financial services laws. Culture is key. So you do need your people to have the right attitude towards customer complaints, etc. And the way to think about how does culture working with compliance documentation, if the heart, mind, and soul is the culture, then the skin and the skeleton is the actual documentation. And you need to have both. You can't say that I comply with all the laws because we've got a fantastic bunch of teams, etc. if you don't have the evidence of that. And the other thing is, and this is where the data starts coming back in, by understanding what the customers are telling you from a complaint perspective, then you can continually improve as well. So you don't just look at trying to resolve the individual complaint. You then have to take a step back and say, right, what is the customer data telling us, and have we got a wider issue here where something hasn't worked the way it was supposed to, and then we'll go fix that. And then that way your organization will continually improve, and that of itself then starts becoming a competitive advantage as well. So that's just some general compliance tips. Now let's move quickly to RG-271. Again, this is not an exhaustive analysis of RG-271. If you do want to go to the ASIC website and download RG-271, it's pretty simple as that. So what is the key? Unlike most ASIC regulatory guides, most ASIC regulatory guides do not have the force of law. Now, you'd be a bit of an idiot not to pay attention to ASIC, and I say the word idiot in a very, very nice way. I would not call any of my clients idiots. I may hint that they are if they're not paying attention to what ASIC says. But why RG-271 is quite a unique regulatory guide in that the enforceable paragraphs only have got the force of law because of the operation of the Corporations Act under Section 912A subsection 1, where it says that ASIC has got the power to make the actual standards for IDR, and ASIC does that by the enforceable paragraphs. So the way to analyze RG-271 is if it is an enforceable paragraph, and ASIC's been very good, they actually tell you via the actual heading, this is an enforceable paragraph, then you must do that. That's got the force of law. If it's not an enforceable paragraph within RG-271, then it's guidance. And again, if you're not going to comply with ASIC's guidance, you better have a pretty good understanding why or how you do it. So for example, ASIC as guidance says that you should acknowledge the complaint within a 24-hour period. If you do it within 48 hours, that's okay. Having said that, the enforceable paragraph said that you must manage a complaint within 30 days, unless it's a superannuation complaint, then you've got 40 days. They are enforceable paragraphs. Just quickly moving on, the actual new definition of complaint, which is about an organisation. Again, ASIC have given us some enforceable paragraphs there. It's social media, which is owned or controlled by the AFSL holder, where the author of the post is both identifiable and contactable. And ASIC specifically say that does not extend to any third-party social media such as Facebook, Instagram, etc., etc. However, I do know most organisations do monitor that anyway. So no, I think that's just, from a good thing. It's quite hard to identify people from those social media platforms. But certainly, if on your own website or whatever that you've got a way that customers can talk to you via a chatbot or any other forms, then if they make a complaint via that, then it does fall within the actual definition of the complaint. I've already talked about how important the timeframes are, and you must adhere to them. And I'll kind of leave that to Simon as to how an automated way can kind of help you to meet your obligations at law, rather than having them in Excel spreadsheets or whatnot. And I'll just kind of finish up on now 2 or 3 points. Just be very mindful when there's multiple AFSL holders involved with a single complaint. And we see this in insurance space a lot, whether it be in the claims handling law or whatever. You may have 3 or 4 AFSL holders. It's no good agreeing at the time of the complaint who's going to handle it, because don't forget, your obligations apply to each of you. And if you allow someone else to handle the complaint on your behalf, you've actually now outsourced it. So you need to identify is what the complaint's about and who's going to handle it, and that the 30-day time frame applies. What we do know is that if you hand over the complaint to another organisation, that's when customers fall out. So just be mindful if there's multiple AFSL, just be very careful of handing it over to others. Probably the last one I want to talk about is the whole easy to understand and use. And this is the customer-facing side of things. It's no good having a simple, and because by law you must have an external complaints policy on your website, publicly available. It's no good having, if you know that a certain population of your customers are from non-English speaking backgrounds, it's pointless of having that complaint policy in English only. You have not complied with RG-271. So it has to be easy to understand and use for all of your customers. And you know your customers best. So if you've got people who've got hearing impairments, etc., then it's your job, not the customers, it's your role to make sure you've made it easy for all of your customers to understand the actual complaints mechanisms in place. And that goes hand in hand with the vulnerability factors as well. So I might pause there. Yeah, as I said, I could talk about this for a very long time, but I'll hand back now to the team.
Thanks, Paul. That was awesome context on RG-271. By the way, if anyone's got a question or a comment and you don't want to interrupt, there is a put your hand up feature, of course, in Google Meet. So feel free to throw your hand in the air and we can maybe pause and address the question. We've also left some time at the end. So if you want to wait till the end and ask a couple of questions, that is also fine. Right, so with that, I don't see any hands raised virtually, so I'm going to hand over to one of the specialist consultants from Eliiza, Marina.
Thank you, Simon. Hello, everyone. My name is Marina. I'm a senior data scientist at Eliiza. Together with Kasna and Google, we are building solutions for businesses leveraging the state-of-the-art artificial intelligence and machine learning tools. These tools can be also used for accelerating the complaints and customer dissatisfaction identification. We live in a very exciting time where we have growing wealth of data, compute powers, and this drives the development of algorithms that become more and more sophisticated and are well positioned to help with the identification of this tricky subject as complaints. So let's have a look at some of the building blocks of such solutions. So natural language processing or natural language understanding, they sit at the intersection of computer science and linguistics, and they are a cornerstone of modern solutions for businesses. The area is very rapidly developing, and it powers all sorts of everyday applications that we're using, starting with autocorrection, spell checkers, spam classification, machine translation, any other applications that you may think of, voice assistants. And these tools can help with understanding human language. So of course, complaints are quite often delivered through human language. And so this is why natural language processing is a very suitable tool, or suitable range of tools to identify the complaints. Let's have a look at the practical application of NLP for complaints. So as Paul was mentioning, and if you've seen the regulation, the definition of complaints according to RG-271 is quite broad and fuzzy, and it shows the ambiguities, or emphasizes the ambiguities, and even the staff requires to undergo training to be able to reliably identify complaints. So it is probably safe to assume that for an algorithm, it would be not a trivial task as well. And so there's no, it would have been easy if every call had a, or conversation, interaction with the customer had a reference to, attention, this is a complaint. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And so we need to find proxies to reliably find or interpret whether it is a complaint or not. So natural language processing helps with converting our very unstructured and unsearchable data into a more structured and searchable asset that can be used to power downstream tasks and be used for analysis and extraction of the insights. And these insights, such as topics, sentiment, and named entities, can be used as important signals that are fed into the complaints model. So imagine we have an incoming interaction from the customer. What we want to know is, why did they contact us? What are they had intents? What did they want to achieve with this interaction? How did they feel about this? What products did they mention? So through these various steps of analysis, we are able to enrich our data and make this a usable asset. There's this small example of a complaint conversation that highlights how all these individual blocks are coming together. Let's quickly unpick the individual building blocks of the solution. I did mention, next slide, please. Yes, I did mention that the data undergoes a transformation. So no matter which channel the customers are contacting us, the general principle for complaint identification is very much the same. The complaint is a complaint, although it comes in different flavors or is expressed in different ways, but the principle stays the same. First, we start with the appropriate data transformation. For example, Twitter conversations, Twitter exchanges are very short and sharp, but the contact center conversations can be tens of minutes long, maybe even an hour. And so the phone conversations would be transcribed using speech-to-text solutions. Then this data is further transformed, cleaned, and enriched, so we understand who said what, so what parts were discussed by the client, which parts were discussed by the agent. And then this data set, this enriched and cleaned data is passed to the next modules that extracts additional insight. So as was mentioned, we focus on had intent identification or call drivers or topics. So what did they talk about? How did they feel about what they were talking? And any additional modules or insights that may be suitable for this, be it products or competitors mentioned, any details like that. Together, these powerful signals are later used as an input to the complaints module. And the complaints module is the essence of this algorithm that is allowing you to understand at scale which calls are requiring the follow-up and which calls should be triaged for further investigation. This enriched data, along with the estimation of whether it is a complaint or not, is passed down to the next system, so be it your downstream complaints management software, or for business users for analyzing these insights and derive further business value. This is an iterative process, and it greatly benefits from your data and the feedback loop. So with the feedback provided by subject matter experts and adjustment and fine-tuning of the algorithm, the solution becomes more and more geared to work for your specific domain or your business. Let's have a look at the details of some of the tools that I mentioned. First, it's the sentiment analysis. Sentiment analysis is a very, very powerful tool that helps us interpret how did the customer feel during the interaction with your business. This is an example of a conversation between a customer and an agent, and the customer is expressing their dissatisfaction with the fees that they were not notified about. So the sentiment allows us to understand whether the customer was positive about what they were talking or negative. And also it allows us to measure the intensity of this feeling. So how knowing that they were not happy is one thing, but also knowing how unhappy they were is another important component. I want to say that the sentiment by itself is not enough. It is really important to understand the context of the conversation. So if the customer is calling to purchase a death or funeral insurance, the sentiment would probably be low because it is a third topic to discuss. But understanding the context of this conversation allows us to understand that this is not related to a complaint, and it's simply the nature of the conversation. So knowing the sentiment and the context of the conversation is important. On the next slide, let's see how monitoring the change of the customer sentiment over time allows us to derive additional insights. So the cumulative profile, so this profile of the sentiment throughout the call shows us how the customer, what was the journey of the customer sentiment throughout the conversation. And the greater the value, the more positive the conversation was, and with lower values, of course, the sentiment was likely negative. So this is an example of a complaint conversation where it starts on a fairly positive note. The customer is greeted, but then we see that the sentiment starts to decline. And this is when the customer is explaining what is the nature of the problem that they are seeing. And then after it reaches the lowest point, we see that it actually starts growing back up. And this is when the agent and the customer are working through investigating what is the problem, and they arrive at a resolution, and we see that the customer is exhibiting a positive sentiment, which leads to finishing the call on a positive note. Being able to analyze such profiles at scale across all of the conversations is really important because it allows you to identify learning opportunities, find outlier calls, and monitor the change on a day-to-day basis. The same is true for the next use of sentiment, where we monitor the variation of the sentiment throughout the calls in aggregate. So for example, on a day-to-day basis or on a weekly basis, we can observe the difference in sentiment for agents and customers. This shows us two important pieces of information. First, we see that the variation area of the agent sentiment is quite narrow. This is to be expected because that just reflects that the training that the agents are receiving is useful, and they maintain a neutral or positive attitude and don't exhibit a wildly varying range of sentiment, which is great. On the other hand, we also can see that the customers are showing a greater variation in sentiment throughout the conversations, and potentially can see that the sentiment at the start of the call is could be lower, but then we are able to monitor whether it is improving toward the end of the call or not. And again, monitoring this on aggregate at scale allows us to measure the change and have a pulse of your customer interactions, and through identifying these outliers and examples of course that need to be followed up, we're able to bring our risk identification to earlier stages. Now let's have a look at the next building block of a solution, that is topic modeling. And topic modeling is another component that is very crucial. So as I mentioned before, if we are in a contact center setup, we may have a very long conversation. And of course, not everything in this conversation is important or related to or relevant for a complaint identification. So through unpicking this call into the call drivers and head intents and the key discussions, we are able to focus on what matters and eliminate all the noise. And topic modeling has two flavors, supervised and unsupervised. In case of supervised approach, we use pre-trained models that are created to recognize and preset range of categories. So that colorful bubble on the left shows the categories that are available for identification through Google services. While it is very comprehensive, it is, of course, maybe not necessarily as important for some of the domains, so they don't necessarily focus on something more specific to your business. But the good news is that it is retrainable and it can be adjusted with the data that is specific to your business. It can be fine-tuned and tweaked and transformed to work for your use case. The key, of course, the catch is the data, so the data availability and data quantity. And so sometimes when this data is pre-labeled data, examples are not available, we can reduce our appetites and start with looking at a semi-supervised approach where we focus on finding examples of sentences or paragraphs that are that could be potentially incriminating or very important for your business, and this could be used as a starting step to identify some high-risk language. I want to emphasize that this goes beyond just pure keyword spotting or fuzzy search, because this semi-supervised approach is able to find examples of paraphrasing or messages that are semantically similar to what we are looking for. And so it is a very powerful use case, a powerful tool. What do we do, on the next slide, please, what do we do if we don't have supervised or labeled data? That is okay. We can still derive some value from the data set that you have from the customer conversations. And typically we use the unsupervised approach for topic extraction. And what that does, it leverages the statistics to uncover hidden patterns in your textual data and identify clusters of similar conversations or find keywords and key phrases. And with the lack of labeled data, this unsupervised approach is a great starting point that helps us elicit the head intents and then move forward and accumulate a little bit of labeled data to move to a more move to the supervised approach. And I want to mention that this is, while it is great, the unsupervised approach is quite useful, it does require a little bit more handwork to interpret the results and consult with the domain experts to interpret whether these clusters actually match in the business taxonomy or business ontology that is specific to your use case. So let's have a look how these building blocks tie together into a complaint model. As was just mentioned about topic modeling, complaints modeling is also can also be seen as two different flavors, supervised and unsupervised. So if you're in a situation where you have many examples of complaint calls and you have the data with these labels, what we can do is we take the data and train a, let's say, a neural network classification model that is able to understand what are the underlying signals that lead to this conversation being a complaint. And so this trained algorithm can be then applied to new conversations that come through your contact center or from the customers. And when we don't have labeled data, we use a different approach, which is unsupervised topic modeling. We still use the same input. So as I was mentioning, head intents, sentiment, any business specific data, any external data, be it even from AFCA. And so these signals are used to analyze the data set at scale and rank the calls based on the likelihood of this conversation being a complaint. And then once we see new conversation come in, we are able to say that, oh, this is likely to be a complaint as well. And again, through iterative process and retraining and fine-tuning and consultations with the subject matter experts, these algorithms can be improved and made more robust and suitable for your business. I do want to say that, as we mentioned, complaints are tricky, not necessarily straightforward even for a human. And so it is important to understand that an algorithm would also be making some mistakes. And so the fine balance here is between being able to reliably identify complaints, but also making sure that we don't generate too many false alarms and, just not saying that half of the conversations is a complaint and so that we're safe. No, this is refined and fine-tuned to make sure that we achieve the optimal balance between these metrics. And finally, to conclude, it's I guess worth mentioning that complaints are an outlier, but a very expensive one. The good news is that in the general large volumes of everyday interactions with the customers, complaints are only a smallest fraction of these conversations. However, that makes it even trickier and more challenging to identify these complaints. And it emphasizes the importance of being able to recognize them. And so a solution that operates at scale and covers 100% of your customer interactions is able to find these rare events. And with the artificial intelligence and machine learning, we're able to build solutions that are consistent and can be applied to different channels and help with the identification of risk early, which brings the compliance from reactive to proactive. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Marina. Not seeing any questions pop up in the chat or hands raised. So what we wanted to do next, I think, is give you a bit of insight into how some of these different components come together into a real solution. And so Kasna and Eliiza between us have produced an accelerator called Vox AI. We're pretty excited about it because it leverages a lot of the concepts that Marina's just brought to light, but also the IP is actually being used to deploy into real customers as well. Some of them large financial services, but I guess part of the idea behind this is democratizing some of that and bringing it down and making it scalable all the way down for smaller financial services companies to take advantage of as well. So the solution you're about to get a walkthrough with a few screenshots, it can be deployed within Kasna Cloud for those that wouldn't want to deploy the solution themselves, or it could be deployed in a customer's Google Cloud instance. But the aim was just to give you a bit of a flavor of how some of these components come together. So how it hangs together, really, on the left-hand side, Marina was talking about the different channels that complaints could be registered through. So that's kind of ingestion. It could be anything from emails, it could be documents or social media. But what we find is critically important for most customers is contact center information, so call recordings or real-time call streaming. After we ingest that, it really kind of comes into the meat of the solution, which is what Marina covered. And of course, that's things like natural language processing, interpreting information, potentially translation, sentiment analysis, complaint analysis. All of those components sit in those kind of process and understand layer. And there's really a key reason that building this on Google Cloud Platform is differentiated. And that's that a lot of these key machine learning services within Google Cloud's ecosystem are much more out of the box and user-friendly. And so what we find is we're able to spend a lot more time on the value adds around, tuning the system and valuable features like that, rather than stitching together a bunch of technologies. So it really makes it fit for purpose a lot faster. Finally, Paul talked a lot to data and, how important data is. So not only do we understand this in real time, but we make a pool of data available on complaints and other items that have been interpreted from the data. Finally, on the right-hand side, you're seeing the use here. So in the walkthrough example, I'm really talking about users consuming the information. So this is primarily reporting and dashboards. At the end, I'll tie that off a bit because I think there's an important element around automation as well, which Marina also raised. So what you're seeing here is a bit of a looker dashboard, and you can see in this example, we've got kind of 100 calls that we've ingested through the system. Just want to make a point here that some of the financial services customers we've worked with, we've processed up to 400,000 calls a month. So this is kind of an inherently scalable piece of technology or group of technologies we've drawn together here. In this particular sample, you can focus on the red number in the middle. So we've got, we can see around 30% of the calls here are considered a complaint. And obviously with a sample size of 100, that's around 30 complaints. The other important thing here I draw your attention to, Marina talked a lot about topic extraction. So down the bottom, what you're seeing is the number of calls from those complaints. What was the topic that drove that complaint? Really, really important as you look to some of the advice that Paul was giving before to have a good understanding of what the topics are that are likely to drive complaints and be able to intercept those and report on them. Drilling down again here, we get a little bit more information. So you can see in the middle, again in red, we've got an average dissatisfaction. And so dissatisfaction here kind of ranges between 0 and 1. And it's based mostly on the words spoken and understanding those words. And the tuning that Marina was talking about here, you can see that anything that's less than 0.3 in this scenario, we're going to consider it a complaint. Again, you're seeing another statistic on the right of that, which is sentiment. So sentiment really, again, is on the language used and ranges really from -1, which is very negative, up to +1, which is kind of a really positive sentiment over the call. So we can see below that in a couple of boxes across these complaints, what's the average customer sentiment and also the average agent sentiment as well. And again, Marina really covered the importance of understanding both of those aspects in the data. Just moving on to the next component, what we'll do here is actually drill into one of these topics. And you can see what that will allow us to do is bring up the individual calls within that topic and have a look, what was the dissatisfaction across those particular calls and complaints. And again, then we can drill in to the actual call recording itself. So what happened during this call that drove the complaint? And so on the top here, you can kind of see that journey as Marina was talking about before. And of course, we can hover over different points in the call and look at the phrases in the conversation that really related to that sentiment. So you can see here in this example, what the customer's doing is actually calling to cancel their car insurance policy, right? Because they've had a poor experience. You can see over the course of the call, down the bottom, some of the key words that are used. They're talking about how expensive it is and the damage caused. But alternatively, as this agent starts to turn around the sentiment of the call, you can see they've used the term discount, right? And so that word discount's used periodically in the complaint timeline, and that drives a more positive experience in the call. And in this particular case, you can see that the call was resolved. And actually, if you drill into this call log, you can see that the customer actually renewed their policy at the end, right? Such a complaint, if you're relying on manual tagging of that complaint, you know, that agent might never have flagged that because it resulted in a renewed policy. So this is giving you kind of genuine insight into the complaints being made in real time, and also potential solutions to that complaint as well. Last thing to cover, as I said, this is the same slide as at the start, only on the right-hand side in terms of using the data that we're interpreting from the system is slightly different. You'll see on the top here, you know, what we're talking about is a virtual agent. So chatbots are becoming increasingly popular, but one of the key challenges or choices for, I guess, an organization is how are we going to deploy a chatbot, and what are we going to make it do, and what capabilities will we give it? The data that sits within this system, if we've analysed the topics that people are calling about and what drives dissatisfaction, that allows us to really make wise decisions on digitising those services and using chatbots. And what that means is, beyond just investing in kind of risk reduction and RG-271, we're actually creating a capability for the business that allows us to interact digitally more effectively with our customers and at a much lower cost of service. The other trend that we're seeing here that I call out is the bottom one, which is agent assist. And that's where we surface information during the call in real time to help the agent actually deal with the call. So if you think about the previous example, it might be that, you know, agent consistency and training is not always consistent across the whole call center. So maybe it's an agent that doesn't know about leveraging discounts to help with a customer that's having a poor experience. We could quite easily flag some information to that agent while they're in the call based on the signals we're interpreting. So both really important use cases that drive positive customer experience on top of that platform that we're kind of building for dealing with RG-271. So that brings the prepared content to a close. So just if there's anyone that had a question for either Paul or Marina or anyone else, I'm happy to kind of take a couple of questions if they're out there. Jack.
Hey, Simon. I'm sorry, I was a little bit late to the start. I hope it hasn't been covered already, but something that's come up is a more holistic approach or view of the complaints that come in for RG-271, and understanding how to identify clusters of complaints that are most at risk of breaching SLAs. Is that something that we've covered throughout the session, or is that something like, how do we, I suppose, build that into the solution?
Yeah, I guess Marina can probably talk a little bit about the clustering, but certainly how you visualize the information. If you've got all of that data from your interpretation, it's more about how you visualize it. Marina, did you want to make a couple of points there?
Yeah, exactly. So with the, you know, from going from the hours, probably, I don't know, a gazillion of hours of recordings that is not very accessible, we're able to go to a highly structured and searchable data. And so we understand at scale what are, let's say, tags associated with a specific call, and then through aggregating those calls based on the, you know, calls with lower sentiment at the end, or calls with any types of petitioning, we're able to triage those calls that fall into a specific category that we're interested in to follow up. And this would be, you know, sentiment driven or topic driven, or both sentiment and topic, or any other signals that we may derive from the data.
And I guess it also underpins, you know, I showed a few, I guess, simple looking dashboards in Google's Looker tool, but with one particular banking customer, you know, I was talking about 400,000 calls per month. We can actually use the same dashboarding tool to give them everything from a top-down view of what people are calling about, all the way to being able to zoom into specific conversations that might be flagged as particularly risky. So it's part of the power and elegance of the solution is the scalability to high volumes. Hopefully that answers the question, Jack.
It does. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Any other questions from anyone else? No, I'll take silence as we covered it exhaustively. Cool. All right. Wonderful. Well, really appreciate everyone joining today. So thanks for your time. I hope you found the session informative. We'll certainly be sending out some follow-up, including the recording of the call and probably a short survey as well, just asking you to give us some feedback on how useful the information was. So again, those in Melbourne, happy Freedom Day to you. Those potentially still in lockdown, we're with you. And I hope you all have a really, really great Friday and a great weekend. And we will catch you all soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Marina. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marina.
Thank you. Bye.
Let's try and
Well
stop.
done. Well done. Bye.
Thanks.